With me, as always, Sal Vetri, and as always, this show presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, home of the $250,000 NFL baller. They now have CSV uploads as well, $25,000 to first. It's a beautiful thing over there at Yahoo because you can get your $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points, those YSRPs, simply by signing up through us at awesemo.com. Very simple. Go to the NFL tab at awesemo.com. You'll see in the articles section any primetime article from the last couple days. They should still be at the top of the page. They are free, written by EMAC, does a phenomenal job. And click the Yahoo link right there. When you sign up, use the code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, and get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points upon depositing. The YSRPs, they're as good as cash to win money, play and win money on the site, like the $25,000 NBA baller tonight, $10 to enter, $5K to first. And if you look hard enough, you'll even find some management-free contests where everything paid in by the player gets paid out back to the player. A lot of reasons to play over there at Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, especially those YSRPs. Get up to $30 by signing up with us at awesemo.com. Again, click the Yahoo link at the top of any of these primetime NFL articles, or we'll throw the link in the YouTube chat as well throughout the show, and you can do it that way. Just use the sign-up code AWESEMO when you do. Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, sponsor of the Deeper Dive. Sal, how are we doing this morning? I said Deeper Dive. Sorry, I meant strategy. I do too many shows, man. I think we all knew what I meant.
Yeah, you're all good. Yeah, doing well. We got, 6 teams on bye, we were just saying. So, yeah, looks like a lot less options. 10-game slate like last week, too. But the salary on these smaller slates, it's interesting to see how you can kind of build lineups. So, excited to take a first look.
How'd week 9 go for you?
Week 9 went well. The chalk options at running back were the McCaffrey and Samuels. And, I just followed the chalk there at points. And then 2 weeks in a row now, Mike Evans just explodes. So some of those 3 max lineups really propped up a lot of my stuff. So, yeah, it went well. It was one of the better weeks of the season.
Good. It's actually hilarious that people were that worried about Mike Evans. And now look, dude is one of the best fantasy wide receivers in the league on a team that can hardly run the football. They've got the Arizona Cardinals this week. We'll get into all of it. We've got 10 games, as you mentioned, a large amount of teams on bye. 10 games last week, too. I like these 10-game slates. Actually enjoy them quite a bit. And I think this week it's a little bit different because at quarterback, I actually don't have that many options that I love, but there's like 5 or 6 that I really like. Running back, there's a good amount. Of course, wide receiver has some too, but starting at the quarterback position, we go position by position on this first look show. Tomorrow, Chris Spags and I will break down first look at ownership and a whole lot more. And then Thursday, Sal and I will go game by game, break down each one of these on their own. But at quarterback, first of all, Lamar Jackson has been spectacular. This guy is totally different breed of quarterback. It's phenomenal. You haven't seen something similar to this really since Michael Vick, and he's on pace to shatter a lot of Vick's records on the ground, which is even more impressive. Already on the season, he has 5 rushing touchdowns, 12 passing touchdowns. But if you look at this matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals, the Bengals this season are allowing more rushing yards to quarterback than any other team by twice as much. They're allowing double the rushing yards per game. Now, I want to be fair. They've already faced Lamar Jackson. So teams that have faced Jackson opposed to other quarterbacks, Sal, are going to see that stat skewed. I totally understand that. But Kyler Murray also rushed for almost 100 yards against them. And in large part, any team that has a even semi-competent rushing quarterback has put up solid numbers on the ground against them. What are your thoughts first at the highest priced quarterback of the week, Lamar Jackson, big road favorite over the Cincinnati Bengals?
Yeah, I love Lamar Jackson here. A lot of the things you just said, I'll just echo in terms of the Bengals really struggled to stop mobile quarterbacks in general, secure sacks, anything. They're bottom 10 in pass rush. They're bottom 5 in rushing yards allowed overall. And now you have Lamar Jackson coming in, who's he's going to be shattering everything. This guy is averaging right now 79.6 rushing yards per game. That's by far the highest for quarterbacks and a lot higher than many running backs this season. He's a guy who's averaging 29% more fantasy points per attempt than any other quarterback on the slate. The next closest is Patrick Mahomes, and he's 29% better than him on a per attempt or per drop back basis. And obviously the rushing stats help you with that. So yeah, Lamar Jackson in this spot, yes, he's priced up 7,300. It's an interesting spot because he is priced up. All of his players on his team have great matchups, and we'll get into that probably more in the Thursday show for game stacking. But because of how good he is on the ground, like he is like maybe the one quarterback in the league still that you can run out there naked and have some upside with, but he does have quality options to throw to. He's right now in a list of 4 players that I have as yeses earlier in the week for QB. And it's going to be hard to kind of get away from him. I think we'll have enough value to fit him in.
I would think so. I would hope so, at least. The big thing too is that Lamar Jackson's floor has been really high, right? So whether it's cash games or tournament, you're getting good production every week. He has one game with fewer than 21 fantasy points. That's against a stout Pittsburgh defense that has really looked a lot better since the start of the year. I mentioned earlier in the season, this defense is a lot better than they looked through the first few games. Then they add Minkah Fitzpatrick, and they become really, really imposing on the defensive end. But you listen to this, Sal. I mean, Lamar Jackson, his fantasy point totals, and this isn't box score hunting either. This is just what he does. 36, 34, 21, 26, 14, 34, 26, 29. I mean, almost every game you're expecting huge numbers from him. And then you get him against the Cincinnati team. I think kind of everything we just said, it is hard to get away from Lamar Jackson, even at this price. Now, there are other good quarterbacks. We'll get into all of that. But would you put him as your number one right now?
It's close. I don't know if I get to him as my number one. We'll talk about another guy, really just Drew Brees because of stacking options. I like that spot a little bit better, but yeah, he's like 1A, 1B right now for me. He's pretty high up there. It's really hard not to like a guy who's averaging double-digit fantasy points per game on the ground alone this season.
I think that is the only part about Jackson that can be frustrating is, I know Marcus Brown is back, so that's good. He had a couple long receptions last time out of 10 plus yards, but only targeted 4 times. Of course, very difficult matchup. But you've got him, and then you've got Mark Andrews, who has definitely regressed since those first couple of games. I think we all anticipated that. But other quarterbacks definitely do stack better with their pass catching options. Lamar Jackson, he's the one quarterback that I've actually rostered with Mark Ingram at times this year. It goes to show you how much they focus on the run. And in this game, they are 10-point favorites on the road, 45.5 total. Their 27.8 implied total is the third highest on this slate. Excuse me. Now, 2 other teams with the highest implied totals are players that we'll get to right now. We can go down the list a little bit, but New Orleans and Tampa Bay. New Orleans has a 32-point implied total against Atlanta. Outrageous. Game is at home in the Dome. 51-point over-under. They're 13-point home favorites. So you just teased Drew Brees a bit there. Let's talk about him and Jameis Winston. They opened at 30 points. It's down to 28, but it's still the highest, or second highest behind only the Saints. 51.5 over-under in this game right now is the highest on the slate overall. And they're 4.5-point favorites at home. So 2 pretty appealing options there between Drew Brees and Jameis Winston.
Yeah, it's just crazy starting with Drew Brees. I mean, how bad this Atlanta team is. I mean, 13-point underdogs with the offense they have. Just not clicking. Then obviously a big part of that is the defense. So Brees makes sense. It's just a scary spot, like as a 13-point favorite. Lamar Jackson a little bit different because of the rushing upside as a 9.5-point favorite. But like the shootout potential here can go out the window. You can see a lot more Latavius Murray with Alvin Kamara, who I'd expect to be back. But I like Drew Brees, 32-point. Highest on the slate team total. It's a good spot overall for Brees against Atlanta, who we know is just right there with Tampa Bay as a pass funnel defense. Right now, this season, Atlanta is giving up 24.9 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, third highest on the slate behind just Arizona and Tampa Bay. So nice spot for Brees, who should get Kamara back. I mean, you think about just stacking this team, it should be Michael Thomas as an obvious option. And then after that, it is probably Kamara. We'll see how he is doing with his ankle this week after having a week off there. So I do like Drew Brees. Jameis Winston is a third guy out of these 4 quarterbacks I have. It's Brees, Jackson, and Winston. Those are the top 3 right now that I have. 28.5 implied team total. It's a good spot as well. I mean, they're priced at similar spots, and it seems like Jameis is a 4.5-point favorite, should be in a game that at least has a better chance to shoot out with Arizona on the other side, a decent team total of 24. So I think right now it's very close. It's going to be a tight knit of quarterbacks for me. Jackson, Winston, and Breeze, and then Murray. Those four are kind of the guys at the top right now for me.
I have a lot of respect for Matt Ryan, or I'm sorry, for the Saints defense, but I really wouldn't be surprised to see in a divisional game, Matt Ryan and this Atlanta Falcons offense put up numbers. Like, I'm actually very surprised to see that they have a 19-point implied total. I get, Sal, that they're big dogs. They should be. New Orleans is a phenomenal team. But I don't think we should ignore either that we're talking about a quarterback in Matt Ryan who, outside of the game where he was injured against the Rams, has thrown for 300 plus yards in every game that he played from start to finish, right? I mean, he's thrown 15 touchdowns through 7 games. He's averaging 2 touchdowns per game. He throws a lot of interceptions too, but it really doesn't matter when you dock only 1 point on those turnovers. So, I mean, I think this game has a shot to shoot out too. And even if it doesn't, it could still be one of these like 40 to 24 games where Matt Ryan still throws for 303 touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, he's leading the slate in the entire league right now at 40.7 pass attempts per game, 310 passing yards per game. Like, he's just racking up points. I'm very surprised to see a 19 over under. This is a team total for them. This is a spot where this is probably the one matchup every single year that you look at and you go, there's going to be like 60 points more times than not in.
Yeah.
So yeah, Matt Ryan's like right on the brink. Really just a team total is what's keeping me a little bit off of him as like the 5th guy into like a quarterback player pool early in the week, but he's right there as like the next level of tiers of quarterbacks that I have interest in right now. It's very surprising to see that total. I wonder if we'll get a little bit bumped up throughout the week if the public starts betting on it.
I hope so. Well, actually, I hope it doesn't, as a matter of fact. I'd be perfectly fine with it staying here because I'm not buying into that. Again, even if they get trashed in this game, they're still going to throw it a ton. And it's not like New Orleans is a run funnel defense. Actually, quite the contrary. That their run defense has been very good this season, ranking 7th in the league according to Football Outsiders. They've stymied a lot of good rushing attacks already. Top 3 according to Pro Football Focus and run defense grade. Like, they're good on both fronts, but not nearly as good in the passing game. As a matter of fact, Pro Football Focus has them right in the middle of the road there in pass coverage, while Football Outsiders has them 11th. So I don't think Ryan will be completely inept here. I think he'll be able to move this ball. If Lattimore's on Julio Jones, could that be tough? Yeah, and I have a lot of respect for Lattimore, but he's also had some struggles this season at times. Who would you like? You know what? No, we'll wait till we get to wide receiver and we'll hit on this game again. Let's move to a couple of other options here. I think we touched on already some of my favorites, most of my favorites. Before we get down to the 6K range even further and the value guys, do you have any interest in Patrick Mahomes, who is expected to take the field against Tennessee?
Yeah, there's always going to be interest there. I just prefer getting up to Lamar Jackson. You know that Mahomes has, just for tournament's sake, if you're trying to game stack or team stack, he has the clearer options. You're going to have a really good matchup here for Kelsey, whose price tag will come down. We'll talk about that. And a guy like Tyreek Hill, whose price tag is up, but a fantastic matchup for a Tennessee secondary that is probably going to be losing with a wrist injury. Malcolm Butler left the last game early. So it's just good matchups all around. Outside of Sammy Watkins in the slot against Logan Ryan. So yeah, Mahomes at 7K is fine. I mean, that's probably a cheap price tag for him. People will see what the ownership comes in on him, but there'll always be interest. He's like that second tier right now. He's just ranked as, when you take into account price and over unders and all these things, he's ranked as a 5th option for me, and he'll probably move up a little bit throughout the week.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know how much Mahomes I get to. Of course, there's the fact that you can pair him with Tyreek and Kelsey and, even Watkins if you wanted to. So he has that over Lamar Jackson. Of course, he doesn't have the rushing upside. But I do think he's always in play. And it wouldn't surprise me to see Mahomes' ownership way down from what it should be. If that's the case, then I could see myself gravitating quite a bit towards Mahomes. We'll see our first look at ownership tomorrow morning on the Strategy Show. But for now, we have to just speculate. What about Kyler Murray? This game you already mentioned, you could see this being a shootout. At the moment, it's got the highest over-under at 51.5. Cardinals have a 23.5 implied total, which really isn't terrible. Uh, this offense, though, it's funny. They've actually slowed things down a lot lately from weeks 1 all the way up through weeks 9. A lot longer to snap the ball, running a lot fewer plays offensively, which makes sense. What they were doing seemed unsustainable earlier in the year, especially with the cast of characters that they have on offense. But this game does have an opportunity to shoot out. And when you talk about pure pass funnel defenses, it doesn't get any more extreme than the Bucs.
Yeah, and that's the big piece of it here. Like, I'm not too confident in the overall weapons of this team. We'll see what David Johnson is expected to be back. They add Kenyon Drake. I'm sure he'll continue to have a role after a really good game on Thursday Night Football. Larry Fitzgerald continues to play very poor. Christian Kirk comes back. So it's a bunch of guys on this team that should be better. And it's just the way that they're scheming right now. It doesn't seem like they're running the offense that they want to because of a lot of injuries. So for Murray himself, I think he's in a great spot against Tampa. I think he can put up points here. You get 34.8 yards per game on the ground, only trailing Lamar Jackson by crazy more than half a game. But still very good volume on the ground for Murray for that upside. And it's just a good matchup against Tampa Bay. He's the guy I'm going to have to look into the most this week. I mean, guys that stand out to pair him with are just Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk, and I'm not too sure I want to continue to run game stacks with those guys because the upside seems to be very much capped. I prefer Christian Kirk right now if I had to just think about that. So it's a guy like Chris at his price point for Murray of 6,500 that stands out more as like a cash option just because when it comes to tournaments, it's really hard to want to stack that side of it in this game. I'd rather just run it back with like one player from Arizona. But that said, he's grading out nice right now. I just know that I'm not going to have as much confidence in those stacks.
Yeah, I don't know if you're wrong there. I mean, I think you'd probably be better off running back a Winston stack with, one Arizona player instead of stacking this whole team. Plus, I don't know what it's going to look like with David Johnson back after Kenyon Drake had a very solid game and how they've been very, hesitant to fully deploy Johnson if he's not at full health. Kyler Murray, though, 11th in deep ball attempts this season, which is actually surprising given how often guys like Christian Kirk have, 10 receptions for 50 yards. And Keyshawn Johnson average depth of target being like 5 yards. These guys, it doesn't feel like he's thrown deep much. Now, it's not like Matthew Stafford, who's attempted 57 deep balls this year, by far the most in the league. But it's also not as few as I would have expected. So I think there are opportunities here just against a dreadful secondary. But I don't know how much I really love Kyler Murray. 49% adjusted completion percentage on deep balls. That ranks 10th. So I think he's been better than I think we sometimes suggest or we would assume. But in terms of prioritizing him, are you going to prioritize him over like even Matt Ryan? And I don't know if I get him over Matt Ryan, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, like right now, that's the difference with me is Matt Ryan's like right behind him for me. But when I factor in like the options Matt Ryan has, it's probably going to be more so at the end of the week, Matt Ryan, just after taking a first look. Because Murray, yeah, like I like the idea that the last 3 weeks they're throwing the ball down the field more, but for like tournament reasoning, and for Murray, that's great. But for tournament reasoning, you don't really know who to choose between, whether it's Keyshawn Johnson, a Damiere Byrd, or a Trent Sherfield. It's really just all spread out through those guys. Kirk's running a little bit downfield, but nowhere near as much. So yeah, he is a fine play on his own right. It's just a matter of like, who do you pair him with at that point?
Anybody else at quarterback that stands out to you? These 6 guys that we talked about in some form or fashion are ranked as my top 6. Some of them distant, pretty far behind some others, but those would be the guys that I would throw in my top 6. Is there anyone that's in your top 5 or 6 that we haven't touched on yet?
No, it's funny. Those are the exact. So like an early look right now for me is if I just did a top 6, it is Lamar, Breeze, Winston. I'm going to flip it to Matt Ryan, then Murray, then Mahomes, or actually Matt Ryan, then Mahomes, then Murray, just after the conversation we just had. So yeah, those are like a top 6. The only 2 people I have starred, and I doubt I get to much, but just as sort of cheaper options, is the matchup in New York or I guess New Jersey with Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones. But it's not something that's a priority. It's just the only cheaper guys that I think are interesting. It's an interesting slate because, yeah, usually you find a guy in the 4 or even 5K range at the low end. That seems to be a fine play. This week, I'm not too sure there's much down there. Like Brian Hoyer has a fine matchup if he fills in for Brissett, but there's a really good chance they run the ball there 35 times and he throws 25 times.
Well, DraftKings preemptively priced him up to $5,900 too.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. He's not $4,600 either.
Somebody mentioned in a comment a week ago or so that you and I agree too much. listen, we both put in, and I wanted to address this because we both put in a lot of research coming into these shows. It's not a bad thing to land on many of the same takes because we're looking at a lot of the same information. So I promise you, if there's disagreements here, they will be aired. But it's not a horrible thing to have similar takes on players when you've put in the same research, generally speaking, in the same spots. You want to talk running back?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Christian McCaffrey on DraftKings up to 10-5. It really doesn't matter it doesn't matter who he faces, where he faces them, when he faces them. Christian McCaffrey is the GOAT. 146 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground against Tennessee, 20 receiving yards and a touchdown as well. Another 40 fantasy point game. That's his third 40 fantasy point performance on the season. He has fewer than 30 fantasy points in 2 of 8 games, and both of them came against Tampa Bay. He's been spectacular. We're still waiting on what value will look like once we get practice reports throughout the week. Do you think it'll be possible to comfortably pay up for someone like Christian McCaffrey without kind of sacrificing talent throughout large parts of the rest of your lineup?
Yeah, I think it is. I think there's already some built-in value that we'll talk about at running back on this slate. Definitely wide receiver, you always have that value. And tight ends prices are a little bit lower and a lot lower really than last week. So I think we'll be able to get McCaffrey. I mean, $500 is what the price point comes up after another week of just absolutely smashing. And now he gets a matchup against the Packers, who give up the 5th most receptions to running backs, 3rd most rushing yards. And they continue to look poor on the ground as their biggest weakness. So yeah, McCaffrey in this matchup, it's a great spot. Honestly, if the price point was 11,000, then it starts to be a question. But it's every week with McCaffrey that I had similar amounts, like 30%, 35% of him and Dalvin Cook last week. And every single week at the end of the week, I'm like, I just have to go very heavy on McCaffrey. Then you go through your whole process of the week and you're like, I have enough relative to the field. But man, this guy's just been so good.
I know. I was above the field on McCaffrey, but not as much as I should have been because I did like Dalvin Cook a lot.
Yep.
And look, to be fair, Dalvin Cook actually saw more looks than McCaffrey last game out, right? He saw 28 looks to McCaffrey's 27 in a really good matchup. The difference is that McCaffrey just is so productive with all of them. And, Dalvin Cook is too, but it kind of just goes to show you, like, you look how good Dalvin Cook's been this season, and McCaffrey's still been exponentially better.
Yeah, I mean, he's been fantastic. And the biggest thing that McCaffrey's doing, it's like if he doesn't score 2 touchdowns in a week, it's surprising. Like you're slating him in for 1 because once they get down, if he's not scoring from outside the 50, once they get down into the red zone, he's getting, whether it's on the ground or in the air, at least 2 looks in that red zone drive if they get 5 plays off.
Right. It's just crazy though. Like if you had told me heading into this week that heading into last week, that Dalvin Cook was facing Kansas City and he was going to see 21 carries and 7 targets, I'd be all over that. And it just didn't pan out, But looking at like Barkley and Kamara, these are the 2 guys that are also up there. They're not close in price to McCaffrey, but nobody is. I love Barkley. I mean, he's a great player, but do you think it makes more sense to say, you know what, let me just find the money to get up to McCaffrey here? Barkley's 8,800, and on FanDuel you've got him weighing in at 8,600. That's $1,900 less than McCaffrey, who's also 10-5 on FanDuel. Or is there merit to getting down to Barkley here at a pretty significant discount?
Yeah, I think you can make the argument that you can get to like just Barkley and Kamara and then try and go from there. I'm still going to get to McCaffrey there. And I do think that, I mean, you don't have to go 100% McCaffrey. So I do think that that's viable. I do prefer McCaffrey even at the price difference. But we know, I mean, Saquon, when you start to see a almost $2,000 price difference from him, Kamara, a $2,300 price difference, we'll see what his injury looks like. It's enough to start to question it because, yes, McCaffrey's been absolutely fantastic and one of the most historic seasons. It's a lot of it is skewed on he's getting a ton of touches, yes, but falling into the end zone, which is correlated with that. But if there's a week where McCaffrey somehow doesn't find the end zone, and I don't think it's this week against the Packers, it's going to be a lot closer in the outcomes with Saquon and Kamara, who are still top-tier running backs. So this week, again, I do prefer just prioritizing paying up for McCaffrey in this spot. But it is interesting to see what the ownership will look like because if you do see a week, and I've done it, I think 2 times this year, where Saquon is around 10% owned, then I'll just go and I'll double the field on that. And it's just kind of a hedge on his talent at that point, as much as just biases around McCaffrey being much better this season. So I still do prioritize McCaffrey, but ownership will really indicate that. I think Kamara is the more interesting one at 8,200. If he's fully healthy and he gets 65 to 70% of the snaps, a $2,300 price difference off McCaffrey. I mean, you could fit them both in potentially, but that's a lot and definitely worth discussing at that point because we know what Kamara's upside is, 30 plus points.
The only concern that I have here is given how good Latavius Murray has played in Alvin Kamara's stead, Saquon Barkley is a lock to get almost every single look as far as this New York Giants backfield goes. Kamara, despite coming off a bye, I still have some concerns there that, okay, Latavius Murray has played really well. Maybe we can limit Kamara a bit here, keep him fresh for the playoffs. Normally, you'd say, oh, well, you don't need to do that, but they're 13-point favorites. Kamara's playing 85+% of snaps every single week. With Alvin Kamara, I think we would have expected to see something similar to that, right? He was playing, 75, 88, 77, 69, and then 59, and then he missed 2 games. It's hard for me to believe that Latavius Murray isn't going to have pretty heavy involvement. So normally Alvin Kamara is more than capable of doing a lot with a little, or a lot with a good amount, but not a ton. I just don't know if I want to run the risk of getting maybe 16 Alvin Kamara touches when Saquon Barkley could see 25 against the New York Jets in a game that we don't expect either team to run away with.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the 13-point favorite for the Saints, it almost reminds me of when, and this is not me recommending or vouching for if Kamara is in playing both Kamara and Murray, because I mean, DraftKings has properly priced Murray up if Kamara misses to 7,300. It's just not viable. But it's a spot where I think that, yeah, you can have Kamara seeing around 18 touches and you could still have Murray seeing a 15-touch game. And if they're that big of favorites, they just run the ball 35 times or around there. Drew Brees throws 32 times and they get out of there. It's a difficult matchup in terms of Atlanta's been good on the ground, but they also have not yet faced McCaffrey or Kamara. They're going to face them 4 times. It's going to be brutal for Atlanta. 4 times in the next 5 weeks. They face McCaffrey twice and Kamara twice. We'll see if Kamara plays this game, but I think that how good they've been, quote unquote, good against pass catching running backs this season as opposed to past is going to be completely skewed the other way now that they face these guys. So 8,200, if he's healthy, I'm going to have stabs on him. I do agree, though, that you're going to see more overall opportunities more times than not for Barkley. And that being said, think he's fine. So, the way that I rank this right now is still McCaffrey in the top end. If Kamara is healthy and playing, I think I will get to him over Barkley. And it's just going to be more of see what ownership looks like and how all the pricing comes out. But it's all really close between really Barkley and Kamara at that point. And we're about to hit a range where there's some really good values.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd go McCaffrey, Barkley, Kamara here. But like you said, this next range we get to is very interesting. I'm going to take you from 69 to 7,100. Now, Le'Veon Bell is injured, and they just signed Josh Adams from the practice squad. They're saying that wasn't because of Le'Veon Bell, but I'm skeptical. They just lost to the Dolphins, man. I mean, it's bad in New York. But let's first talk about a few of these guys at 7K and 7,100. You have Mark Ingram against Cincinnati. The only thing I don't like about Ingram is I don't want to say he's capped at 16 carries or so, but he's seen more than 16 carries once this year, more than 15 twice. And it seems to be that he's even in games where they have comfortable leads, like against Seattle, like against Cincinnati, like against New England, he isn't getting 20 carries. So that hurts. But he's facing a Cincinnati team that is garbage in terms of run defense. And then you've got Nick Chubb against Buffalo. My assumption is that he goes overlooked for a number of reasons. But we did see Buffalo get exposed in the run game. Okay, they've actually been exposed in the run game 2 straight weeks. Jordan Howard and Miles Sanders ran all over them, 218 rushing yards. And then a Washington team that was playing from behind throughout the entirety of this game saw Adrian Peterson eclipse the 100-yard mark. I think Nick Chubb is actually a very interesting option here at home, seeing that he's going to get 20 carries almost every single game. And Buffalo's offense is not talented enough to run this score up in Cleveland.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll start with those 2 7K backs. Or actually, I'll start with Mark Ingram.
We'll get to Marlon Mack after. I didn't forget about him. Don't worry.
Gotcha. Yeah. So 7,100 Mark Ingram. Yeah, I agree. He's getting a ton of opportunities, a huge favorite, everything you like, but it's just so much upside. It has been capped the last couple of weeks and will all season long with Lamar Jackson averaging just more rushing yards per game than his running back right now. So that's tough. As good as Ingram's been, 57% success rate, the guy's still over 5 yards per carry. It's a lot of the scheme that they're going to do, run heavy, good offensive line. So it's tough for Ingram, even with a ton of red zone opportunities and a good matchup. It's just not something I want to bet on. And if somebody wants to say, oh, well, if he gets 2 to 3 touchdowns he's needed, I can say that for 15 other running backs on the slate. If they get 2 to 3 touchdowns, they'll be needed. So no real interest in Ingram around these guys. Yeah, Nick Chubb I like. So Buffalo, like, yes, their defense is good overall, and it's going to be like an anchoring thing where people the first 4 or 5 weeks of the year saw them compared to the Patriots defense and now just think they're that elite in every category, but they're middle of the pack in defense in terms of how much yardage and production they give up to running backs. Now you have maybe the best running back that they'll face so far this season coming in there, Nick Chubb. He's number one in breakaway percentage. He's top 3 only behind Dalvin Cook and Christian McCaffrey in terms of overall rushing grades on the ground. Last week was so odd. I'm going to chalk it up as just kind of random as why Dontrell Hilliard saw 40% of the snaps and Chubb only saw 60%. So this is a team that doesn't give up receptions to the running back, but Chubb doesn't need that. So yeah, $7,000. He's priced, and like you said, we'll get into Marlon Mack now. He's priced next to Marlon Mack. If I had to guess, I would think the public would come in heavy on Marlon Mack against Miami. And if that's the case, maybe we get Chubb on notice. Last week, Chubb was still heavily owned, though. So he's just a guy who always picks up ownership. So this is probably the most interesting spot at running back is what the ownership is going to look like. Well, one, Saquon and Kamara, but then I think the more interesting is Marlon Mack versus Nick Chubb at the same exact price point.
I'd be shocked if Mack wasn't significantly higher on. Yeah. Chubb's also, 6th in yards after contact per attempt. Yards after contact in total, he's 5th. Like, he does a phenomenal job of pretty much everything. 3rd in avoided tackles this season behind only Carson and Josh Jacobs. You mentioned elusiveness, or what did you mention? Breakaway or elusiveness? I can't remember which
breakaway,
one.
But yeah, he's definitely up there in elusiveness too.
Yeah, he's doing everything. I just think that he's going to be seriously overlooked, and that to me in a home game where Buffalo, like we saw Buffalo against the Eagles defense that has had a ton of holes. If you can just get a little bit of pressure, you're going to make Josh Allen's life a lot more difficult, even though he can scramble. Don't get me wrong, man. Cleveland's tackling on that Noah Fant run and a bunch of others was really bad. I mean, it was bad,
yeah.
But they're still 2.5-point favorites over the Bills, believe it or not. Bills have a 19-point implied total. This game has right now the lowest over-under on the slate. But actually, I don't think that hurts Nick Chubb because I think he just continues to get fed drive after drive. And it's going to make him a really fascinating play given that he's coming off a start where Hilliard actually saw some snaps inside the 5-yard line and was on the field more than he should have been. Anyway, what about Marlon Mack against Miami? MCL or a sprain for Brissett is what we're thinking here, an MCL sprain. If I had to guess, Sal, he's not going to play this week, but even if it's Brian Hoyer, I don't know how much it matters. 44 over under. The Colts have a 27.3 implied total, which is one of the highest on the slate overall. Actually, that sits 4th behind the Saints, behind the Bucks and the Ravens. And they're 10.5-point favorites. So, of course, this sets up very nicely for Marlon Mack. And I think the public will be on to that pretty quickly.
Yeah, 10.5-point home favorite here for Mack. I mean, a guy who just continues to get fed carries every single week in the top 5 in opportunities per game for rushing attempts. And it's a spot where if Brian Hoyer's in, the theory going in is you just rely more on Marlon Mack. It's not like Hoyer's one of these quarterbacks who just has no idea what he's doing out there. He's a guy who's going to be comfortable when making starts. He has a ton of starts in his NFL career, but yeah, it's just a spot. $7,000 seems like a steep price point, but he's definitely matched. He's priced up for the matchup. I want to see what the ownership is. If for some reason he comes in lower owned, I'll have more interest in that. But it's just a spot where maybe I probably match the field. We'll see. I'd imagine around 20% ownership is what you get. If it starts to shoot up into the 30s, it's a spot where I think it's okay to get there if you want. But just due to his lack of pass catching ability, it's really going to be touchdown dependent. I think it's fine. It's a fantastic spot against Miami. So breaking down into it, it'll be on ownership. Just finally on Chubb, I think there's one nuance that is somewhat important to mention is Kareem Hunt should be back for this game. And I don't think he's going to obviously come in and be a starter. He's going to be the backup, but just the reluctancy and really the way that the Browns have been coaching and giving, like last week, Dontrell Hilliard 40% of the snaps. And in the past, we've seen similar things. It is interesting to see if Hunt just has a couple of really good runs, if he'll get more snaps. Doesn't cut in a ton to Nick Chubb, but definitely an upside thing there when you're comparing these guys.
Yeah. And Kitchen said that he will have a role. So, that I don't read too much into that. Coach speak. Yeah. half the time is bullshit. And it's certainly possible that have a role means you take the Dontrell Hilliard role away, and you have like 4 carries and maybe 2 targets or 3 targets in the passing game. I guess I would still, and I'm glad you mentioned it because it is important, but I just expect, I shouldn't expect anything with Cleveland. So let me make that clear because they've done a lot wrong. But you would really think that in a spot like this, with Tre'Davious White and a good secondary, but a run defense that has been exposed or at least exploited, that you would take arguably, well, not the best, a top 3, top 4 running back in the league and just run it down their throats. That seems like the way. So whereas you talk about Kamara and Latavius Murray possibly being able to coexist, it should be the case for Nick Chubb at $7K, even if Kareem Hunt returns. That's just my initial analysis on it.
Yeah, I completely agree. It was just more so just like let people know that there is going to be Kareem Hunt returning. But also, I like that you said top 3 or top 4 because I was literally about to say like this season on his individual play behind how bad this offense has been, he's still probably a top 5 running back for 2019. Sure. It's just going to be like, it's going to trigger people to hear Nick Chubb as a top 3 or 4 running back. But it's true. I mean, right now he's ranked number 3rd on Pro Football Focus and a lot of other sites in all the metrics that actually matter for running backs. So yeah, Chubb at $7,000. If he comes in for some reason because he's the same price, and we always see this, if guys are the same price, it's very rare that you see them both come in chalky because people just gravitate towards one person. So if it's Mac against Miami, and I hope that's where it does go, I hope he becomes the 25% chalk and Chubb's hanging around 12 to 15%. That's the spot where I'll probably have like double the field on Chubb and feel good about it, as opposed to him being chalky and I'm just matching the field.
Listen, if you've actually watched Nick Chubb and how bad this offense and how bad this line has been, and you don't think that he's one of the top running backs in the league, you're wrong. Like, if you want to compare his stats to Chris Carson and tell me that he's not better than Chris Carson just because of the numbers, you're crazy. Like, if you put Nick Chubb in Seattle, he'd have 1,000 yards already. Like, I just think he is phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, he's made every single really good defense against him look poor behind a really bad offensive line.
Hey, by the way, kind of off subject, but that Patriots run defense looked suspect the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think it's similar to probably the 49ers. I think they definitely have a better front, but these teams have just been playing from ahead for so long that you don't really get to see how their run defense performs when they have 12 carries against them in the game.
All right, so breaking down more running backs here, do you want to get into the Lev Bell situation, or like, I think it's probably better we just save this for Thursday when we have a little bit of information to go off of.
Yeah, it's extremely iffy right now. Like if Le'Veon Bell's a full go and everything on this MRI is fine, I guess we can just say, at least for me, against the Giants, I think it's a really good spot. He talked with Adam Gase before the last game, and he said that they talked about the role change and they're on the same page, and he takes nothing personal about the trade stuff, and that he's going to see increased work. He pretty much told the media that reading through the tea leaves, and he sees 25 touches, gets his passing game roll up. So if that's going to continue, he's really good at 6,900. Yeah, it's just a matter of in the next 3 days, I would imagine, if not today, we'll have more news on what this MRI is showing.
What about the 6K range once you get down to like Derrick Henry? I personally don't have anything else in that range at all right now. Derrick Henry would be the one guy to discuss. Kansas City did, in large part, shut down Dalvin Cook on the ground. And if Mahomes is back, that makes things interesting. But right now, they're only 3-point favorites on the road. They're allowing 140 rushing yards per game, 4.8 yards per attempt. That's bottom 5 in the league. Football Outsiders has them ranked 30th in run defense DVOA. Pro Football Focus has them 32nd. So, I mean, across the board, this has been a run defense that, of course, injuries come into play, but they have really struggled. And Derrick Henry, well, I was surprised he didn't. The only reason he saw 13 attempts last week is because they were immediately playing from behind. He gets in the end zone so much, though. So he's not a big pass catcher. I do think the price tag inflation is going to make him harder to play. But what type of workload do you expect for Derrick Henry here? A guy that, heading into last week was on pace for 300 plus attempts.
Yeah, I would expect similar workload of like on average, he's getting 18 carries per game. It was nice to see him catch a couple balls again, but don't think that holds up. Yeah, it's the price tag coming up. Like last week, I actually liked him a lot at 5,700.
Yeah, me
or whatever.
Too. I was double the field on him last week.
Yeah, exactly. Like whatever price point he was at, it was really good based on the opportunity you're getting, even though it seems like only a $700 boost. That's pretty significant when there's guys that we're going to get to in the 5K range that are over $1,000 cheaper for similar roles now in their offense. The matchup is a big part of it, right? Dead last in the league. Pro Football Focus has Kansas City since the beginning of last year, but also this year. So yeah, it's a spot where Henry's just a guy in the 6K range, especially if Bell for some reason doesn't go. That is like the only option. I mean, Jalen Samuels priced up, might not even be the starter this week. It's not a spot that I see myself getting to, although it is a fine spot overall. They're giving up the second most fantasy points per game to running backs as these Chiefs. It's just kind of like if he's 10% owned, that's probably what I have.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. I can't imagine I get to a ton at that price, but you know, the one advantage with Henry is he's on pace for 14.5 total touchdowns this year. He is the guy used in the red zone. He has half of the total red zone looks for the Tennessee Titans this year. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, exactly. And they're a team that continues to want to run first. Like even last week, it was very surprising. He only had it's a crazy skewed spot for Henry last week. Even in a good game, he only sees like I think 2 or 3 first half rushing attempts. Catches a couple balls, but then in the second half he got going. So it was just a really weird half that really props down overall his rushing numbers. I think he'll continue to be fine around in neutral spots, see 18, 20 rushes more times than not.
All right, I'll throw a couple names at you. We'll run through the rest of this position quickly and then get to wide receiver, tight end. Few guys I had written down: David Johnson, 5,700. It's not as much the matchup, but what capacity he's used in that worries me. Devonta Freeman at 5,100. Only a 19-point implied total, but again, I think they score more points. I'm probably not targeting the run game there, but he is cheap. Devin Singletary at 5K. They finally, thank you, use this guy. Use this guy like you should be. And unfortunately, I wasn't on him, but doesn't make a huge difference. 20 for 95 and a score, 4 targets, 3 receptions, 45 yards. He is clearly the number one back on this team in terms of talent. It's not close. And he outtouched Frank Gore by twice as much. So good for him. And then Ronald Jones against Arizona. I think his touches will be erratic, and really the hot hand will be played here with Bruce Arians. But he is coming off a game where he carried the ball 18 times, only 67 yards, but they went to him often early and late in that game. He had a touchdown on the ground as well. So those are a few names. You want to touch on them, and anybody else you think that needs to be mentioned here at running back?
Yeah, so I'll touch on those names and then touch on one other person. So Ronald Jones, yeah, last week he had a good game. The problem with me is I just, even at that price point, I'm probably not going to trust these Tampa Bay backs. Only played right around 53% of the snaps, I think. So even a week where he plays well, it took a game that had over like a 60 implied total and just a ton of offensive plays run for him to finally have a good game. And he still is only seeing right around half the snaps. I think that can shift. I think he's the best back in the backfield, but I think it could easily shift to him playing 35, 40% of the snaps next week in a game that's not as high scoring potentially, and he just doesn't get in the end zone. He caught a passing touchdown in this game, which is not kind of his style of play. So probably not a spot I get to, even though the price point is nice. Singletary I like. Right now he's a secondary option for me because I like somebody else in his price range a little bit more. But back-to-back games of 60+% of the snaps. 2 weeks ago, I thought it was just game script trailing against the Eagles. But last week, we just see him unleashed. And he's just so effective. Like he is getting I saw some tweet around like 40% of his runs are going for 5+ yards this year, or touches, including the passing game. He gets a really difficult matchup against Cleveland's defensive line on the road as an underdog. So that's kind of why he falls into a secondary option. Want to see where his ownership comes in. I'm assuming he's getting a lot of positive hype in the media, so maybe that bumps it up a little bit. David Johnson, yeah, right now, from what I don't think DraftKings knows what's going to happen. None of us really do. They priced him the same as Kenny and Drake. He's expected to play. So based on that, what DraftKings is expecting was maybe they thought he might be out, but he's expected to play, they say now. They're kind of pricing it as if this is going to be an even split. Seems like Chase Edmonds should be missing. They said some weeks, so he's only missed one since then, 1.5, whatever it might be. So, yeah, it's a spot where I don't really know what to do with David Johnson. I'm hoping we have more news. I mean, if Kenny and Drake just went out on Thursday night and laid an egg, then yeah, it seems like David Johnson can see 67% of the workload. But he played probably the best game of his career, Kenny and Drake. So there's a good chance this could be a split if Johnson is even fully healthy. I have him as a question mark right now just because that's what he is to me. I really don't know any more information. Devonta Freeman, I don't have listed as anything. I think it's a tough matchup, but I agree with you. The passing game rolls where he's been all season. I just probably don't get there. My favorite play out of the whole 5K range, and probably like a top 3 running back play for me right now, and I'm hoping ownership doesn't follow it, but I think it will, it's just David Montgomery. Have him as a yes. This Detroit team has missed Mike Daniels so much over the last 5 or 6 weeks. Their run defense has been one of the worst in the league. Most fantasy points per game allowed is actually Detroit, somewhat quietly, I would say. And David Montgomery, in a game last week where his offense only runs 45 offensive snaps, 45 because they just can't keep drives alive. Mitch Trubisky throws the ball only 20 times. David Montgomery still is able to produce. Now, he did it on touchdown dependency, but that's good to see, and 3 catches. It's good to see, even in like the worst possible outcome, the guy's still having a really productive game. Now he gets a really good matchup, and his price tag, in my opinion, is like $500 to $700 too low.
Okay. Man, I don't think I get to Montgomery. And maybe it'll change throughout the week, but I'm having such a tough time with how anemic this offense is. I see your side entirely, but those 2 touchdowns he had last week certainly salvaged what would have been another dreadful performance. Remove those touchdowns, and he's had one good game. So what is it about him at the 5,300 price tag that you think in this spot? I know you just named a bunch, but like ultimately, what's the top reason that David Montgomery is a yes for you this week?
Yeah, so he's a yes. The last 2 weeks, he's played 73% of the snaps each of those weeks. So similar to a guy like Devin Singletary, in which he's going to have, it seems like this is now his full job as we expected from the beginning of the year. And then also just you pair that in with, if I can get somewhere around 65 to 70 plus, like he's had the last 2 weeks of the snaps for Montgomery, and with that'll equal out to his 16 to 18 touches a game or so, and all the red zone work as we've seen against this Detroit Lions defense that has been that poor. It's a spot that I'm going to take at the price point relative to some of the other players. You pair in the fact that last week they had a couple of designed passing routes for him, and that he actually contributed on. If you get 4 or 5 fantasy points out of the passing game from him at that price point as well, I like it. I don't think I project that high, but I think I can project around 3.5, 4 points in the passing game. And I'll probably get somewhere around 16 to 18, closer to 18 overall touches for him. So it's the price point matchup and just the last couple of weeks taking over as this clear workhorse. And again, worst possible game for his offense last week in terms of overall plays run and how bad Mitch Trubisky was again. And he still was able to produce. Touchdown dependent, sure, but I like the passing game work that he had as well.
Fair enough. Want to talk some wide receivers?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Let's start at the top. I'm going to run through a list. And it's Tuesday, right? Things are going to change. It's always your disclaimer early in the week. Ownership's going to change. Opinions will change. But it's nice to get a first look at everything. And, of course, if you want to check out the ownership projections, the player projections, and all of that great stuff, head over to awesemo.com/join. You get up to 50% off. Actually, not up to. You will get 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus membership by simply using that promo code NFL Strategy, all one word. Gets you the ownership projections, player projections, all of our top stack tools, NBA boom and bust tool, the premium Slack chat, the lineup builder. There's the Fantasy Cruncher add-on and so much more. Also have a $3.95 per week express package. And if you go to awesemo.com/join, you can watch all of the videos, all the tutorials on how to use these tools before diving in. And we'll even ask you a question, what type of player are you? So we can get you exactly what type of membership subscription you need, cater it to you so it's not too much, it's not too little, and you don't feel like you're in over your head or you're wasting your time. That's the purpose of what we do at Awesemo, and we'd love to have you join us as part of the family. Awesemo.com/join. Use the sign-up code NFL Strategy to get 50% off your first month. All right, let's run through the 7K plus guys. You can rapid fire them at us, Sal. Michael Thomas versus Atlanta, 8,300. He's been stellar with or without Drew Brees, now facing a bottom-ranked secondary at home as 13.5-point favorites on a team, running out of air here, on a team that really only has 2 significant weapons in this offense, whether it be Kamara and Thomas or Latavius Murray and Thomas, depending on Kamara's status. Tyreek Hill against Tennessee. He literally caught up to Damian Williams and outran every defender on the field. He can beat any coverage, 7,700. Mike Evans coming off monster back-to-back games. We'll likely see some Patrick Peterson, but he's been phenomenal. He's 7,600. Then Julio Jones at New Orleans, 7,500. Matt Ryan's expected back. And finally, Chris Godwin against Arizona at 7,400. Those are your guys right now above 7K. If you want to throw Cooper Kupp and Kenny Golladay into the mix, feel free. Those are 2 guys that right now I don't imagine myself having much of, but the floor is yours.
Yeah, so Michael Thomas at the top. It's kind of hard to prioritize him. He's been the most consistent receiver. I think the price point is fair. It's just seeing if you're going to get to McCaffrey lineups, how you get to him. I don't know how often you do at that point. But yeah, Michael Thomas, I have him as just my number one wide receiver. He's going to come out that way in pure projections. Point per dollar, maybe not so as much, but great spot. Best matchup you could have for him individually on this slate. And he gets it here. The price point's steep, but if you want to prioritize it, I think it's fine. I probably do in some spots. Tyreek Hill, I do like. You probably get a Adore Jackson on him, which is a speedy cornerback who's been good this year. I think that it probably won't be shadow, but the way that they move Tyreek Hill around, it's not going to really matter. He's clearly matchup proof. I mean, he beat the only guy who's really beat Chris Harris Jr. this year. Was Tyreek Hill. Odell was a little bit last week, but yeah, Tyreek Hill, again, 7,700. I wish he was somewhere where he was last week around the lower 7K range, but it's something I'm going to have. I once again, in this spot, you get the price points up on Mike Evans. I once again have interest in both of these Tampa Bay receivers. You touched on it. Patrick Peterson on the outside, very small sample, has not looked like the same Patrick Peterson, but he's had moments of being very good, moments of being very bad. Mike Evans, the amount of volume he'll get, I think he's still fine. I think this week, though, I'll slightly prefer for $200 less Godwin. And in those spots where you're stacking, it's just so brutal to have to fit in Godwin and Evans if you want to get there. And we haven't really seen it paid off where you need both of them. So I slightly prefer Godwin as of right now. It's just a loaded top range here. Julio kind of, for me, is falling a little bit behind. He always ends up getting ownership around like the 18-20% range because he's Julio. So I'll see where that comes in. But right now, I'm not having as much interest compared to Tyreek, Michael Thomas up here. So Michael Thomas and Tyreek, two highest price guys, the guys I have the two most interest in, especially Tyreek with Mahomes due back and a banged up Tennessee secondary. And that's probably into the top. And I do think Cooper Kupp's interesting. It seems like Brandon Cooks is not going to play. I think that only helps Kupp. I think it helps some of the other guys taking over, like Josh Reynolds and maybe a bump for Gerald Everett with Cook being out for more volume. But Kupp at this price point of 7,300 is fair. Just a really tough secondary to go up against for big plays, which a lot of Cooper Kupp's production, especially his last game, being fueled off of huge plays. So that's kind of the 7K range. Galladay at 7K flat. I think it's a fine matchup. He'll be moved around enough to have enough volume. He's seeing 17 air yards per target, which is just the best on this slate and the best in the league right now. So if I had to rank the 7K or above range, for me, it's Michael Thomas, Tyreek Hill, and then I probably get to the third most Chris Godwin, then Kenny Galladay, just based on pricing. But it's all very close right now. Early in the week, it's kind of hard to parse between some of these close ones.
Yeah, the only thing about Kenny Galladay that concerns me is this Bears team, even though they've shown some holes, nobody is preventing 20-plus yard passes as good as they are this year. They keep the ball in front of them. So when teams do move the change, it's very, very rare that you're seeing them connect on the deep passes. That has been one area of legitimate success for Chicago. Looking here down a little bit further, we've got T.Y. Hilton likely going to be out for a few weeks, which is crazy because it was a non-contact injury and it's his calf. So, you know, whenever I hear that, it scares the shit out of me because I start thinking Kevin Durant, non-contact, Achilles rupture, right? And then he returns and then boom, you watch it recoil up like a slinky in slow motion up to his leg. I don't know. That's concerning, but he's sidelined. Then you've got Devontae Adams. You got Allen Robinson. Mitch Trubisky just simply cannot get his wideouts the ball. Taylor Gabriel had one on busted coverage, and that's literally the only reason they had that deep ball and a touchdown there. Outside of him, Marvin Jones is up above 6K. Odell Beckham is at 6,100, and I think he should see shadow treatment from Tre'Davious White. That's not fun by any means. Although White, to be fair, has lined up, I think, 88% on the left side this season. So will he shadow him? Maybe. I don't know. My guess is he probably does. But this whole 6K range down to like even 50, I don't know, down to 5K, I guess. Let me look who I have. I have guys written down, but there's nobody I'm absolutely in love with here. I think Devontae Adams is a tough matchup. Will he be targeted? Yeah, he will. But a lot of these are tough spots. And then you've got guys like Fitzgerald and Kirk who are in favorable spots. But as you pointed out earlier, can we really trust their production? What do you have here at 5K and up? Include Jamison Crowder and Pascal if you'd like.
Yeah, so there's only two guys in the 5K and up range right now that I have marked as yeses, but a lot is sort of question marks. And actually, I'll add a third guy into that. So Devontae Adams at 6,900. I have as a yes. I want to look into this more and look back at some of these matchups for Bradbury because there's been spots where he has shadowed like 2 times this year, but there's spots where he'll just guard your primary receiver for like 40% of the time. You would think this is a shadow spot, but in some of those games, they didn't have Dante Jackson, their other cornerback for Carolina. So it was almost forced for him to shadow on that side of the field. I'm not sure if they do that. We'll see what it looks like. I'd imagine Bradbury's on him, which is surely a tough matchup, but $6,900 for Adams. Just the upside in the targets from Rodgers that he'll have, especially around the red zone for probably double-digit targets here. I'm going to have interest in that, especially if the ownership starts to come in lower. Lots of guys with just middling interest for me. Allen Robinson, 6,300. The price point comes down. He probably gets Slay, who's been pretty solid so far this year, limited games because of injury. But it's just a price point where the way Mitch Trubisky has looked in this offense, I think they succeed on the ground here, if anything. So not going to get there as much. Marvin Jones' price tag seems a little bit steep this week for a 19 team implied total. So yeah, it's kind of an empty range of this high 5K, low 6K range. I get all the way down to Pascal, who I think is interesting. And we saw him make some 2 beautiful catches in that game. Even if Hoyer's starting, I have confidence at that price point. He played 90+% of the snaps the last 2 weeks, the clear number one there with Hilton out. Even if Hilton somehow was to play, which I don't expect, if he was, he's still going to play 90% of the snaps or so. So yeah, it's Pascal, it's Devontae Adams, and then Christian Kirk's a guy against Tampa who I like a lot. If you're having Tampa stacks or you're running it back, or even as just a one-off, $5,200 for Kirk. His targets are not that high upside. It's single-digit single-digit air yards, but when you're seeing 10 targets a game at 5,200, it's a spot where if you just fall into the end zone, you're going to smash that price point. And if you don't, more times than not, you could at least hit a median.
For sure. Wide receiver is not that deep this slate. It really isn't, which is why, if you were to look at someone like Jamison Crowder, I get it. A couple of other ones here, though. Robbie Anderson is, God, whenever I look at that headshot, I can't help but laugh. He looks like Coolio. He had a really underwhelming game last time out, and he probably sees a bunch of Janoris Jenkins here who is not having a good season. I do think Robbie Anderson at expected low ownership in tournaments at $4,700 makes sense. I also think, while the Miami Dolphins offense should not be expected to produce like they did last week against the Jets, with Preston Williams out for the year now, that's horrible injury, man. After he really started to come on strong, had a 2-touchdown game, looked great. That's a disappointing injury for a team that just got their first win. But Devontae Parker has someone that's been towards the top of the league in air yards this season. He is getting targeted, and I would assume that now he's only going to be featured even more in this offense. Albert Wilson, we'll see if he starts to get more opportunities. But let's talk about Robbie Anderson and Devontae Parker, both of whom are in pretty favorable spots. One of them because of the matchup, and the other one because there really just isn't anybody else on this team.
Yeah, so I understand. I mean, you're getting a guy who sees 6 targets a week. There's a ton of upside in those targets downfield and what should be a good matchup. It's just GPP only, of course. Like, if you get him at low ownership, that's the spots that you want to take chances on him because it's exactly what you want. You want a guy who is not going to hit all the time, but when he does, you want him at low ownership. There's no reason to eat chalk. He should be low owned. He usually is. The price point comes down $800. So, yeah, I like Robbie Anderson in that range. Right now, he's a secondary option. The guy I like the most in the range is Jarvis Landry. Tougher matchup for sure, but we saw him as somewhat expected featured last week when Chris Harris was the number one cornerback that was on Odell that week. They stopped Nick Chubb a little bit. So Landry sees 13 targets last week. I think he continues to see good volume out of the slot. And it's not so much as I think he smashes for 25 points, but at 4,900, I think that's a fair price point for the volume that he'll see in this offense. He's probably the guy I like the most in that range. I think Crowder's worth a mention as well. Coming off of a big game, though, sees a price increase, but probably not enough against Grant Haley in the slot. The priorities in this range for me are probably Landry. Number 2, I'd come in on Devontae Parker. And then in GPPs, I think I'm fine taking shots with Robbie Anderson. Important to probably point out that Tyler Boyd's price continues to drop ridiculously. Now he gets Baltimore, who he got absolutely shut down and worked by Marlon Humphrey last time in the slot. 3 catches, 10 yards on double-digit targets. Marlon Humphrey is going to be in the slot again. He's been staying there the last 4 weeks. I will say, though, that I think it's a terrible matchup for Boyd and his skill set. But Marlon Humphrey was a little bit exposed 2 weeks ago against Seattle, gave up 5 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown in the slot. Then last week, he gave up 5 catches for 50 yards against the Patriots. So he's been getting a little bit more exposed in the slot, maybe not as comfortable with it, but it's just a really tough spot for Tyler Boyd. If he comes in low owned, maybe he's worth it. But right now, it's interesting to see how much his price has fallen. But right now, it's a really brutal matchup.
Well, he's been in the slot because each of the last 4 teams he's faced, their number 1 receiver is a slot receiver, though, right?
Yep. Yeah, I mean Tyler Lockett, and then last week Edelman, and then he played
Juju.
Juju the week that he went into the slot there. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think before, but the reason I ask is, do you expect him in the slot if AJ Green is playing and lined up outside?
Oh, well, if AJ Green is playing, I would probably say no. The thing is, though, like since Marcus Peters has gotten there, I think they feel more stable. Like it's nobody else is getting slot snaps now, whereas it was like he might have 25 to 15. Last week he played 44 slot snaps, the week before 38. So we'll see what AJ Green's status is like. I think that's a big question mark for the whole slate. Right now, I have it as if AJ Green is out. But yeah, if he's in, that changes a lot of things.
What about the quarterback situation with Ryan Finley for Cincinnati?
Yeah, that makes it even better in terms of better in terms of Marlon Humphreys in the defensive coverage and not wanting to get to Tyler Boyd. Yeah, Ryan Finley, I mean, a guy in the preseason who, if anything, like the guys who are going to benefit from this are the running backs and Tyler Boyd out of the slot. All he did was very productive in terms of stat sheets, but all he did was throw it short. I mean, his A dot yards per attempt was pretty atrocious, but he played well, and that was the way that they played him. I expect that to be the same here. So you should continue to see a similar role, and maybe not as much changes for Boyd in terms of the short passing game. But the upside is just capped even more. And that's a really good point for Dalton being benched.
Any other thoughts at wide receiver?
No, I think there's just some interesting lower end options with Russell Gage increased role against New Orleans. If we think that they score more, Jakeem Grant 3,200 should see an increased role, now running and freed up a little bit, but nothing that stands out.
Let's talk about tight end. And if you guys were perusing awesemo.com with a free account, the NHL line change article is free today, and so is the NBA strategy syllabus, where you take a bunch of our NBA minds and put together a couple of our top plays, top tournament plays, and reasons why. So pretty cool little piece. It's easy to digest. Those are free on the site today at awesemo.com. All right, tight ends. Travis Kelce should be getting Mahomes back, but amazingly, Travis Kelce only has 2 touchdowns on the season. It's funny, though, because when you look at, I tweeted this a couple of weeks ago, really all of the stats are similar to last year in terms of, snaps and routes run and targets. He's just not producing the touchdowns, and he's had a couple really underwhelming games. Let's just start with him and get it out of the way first. Assuming Mahomes is back, what are you doing with Travis Kelce at 6,400?
Yeah, I like Travis Kelce this week. It's finally a spot where every single week seeing him around last week 6,900, but then the 7K range was a little bit restrictive for me, especially with Mahomes out, just not something I really want to touch. But now you get him at a cheaper price tag where it's kind of the average price this season or around there for these top end tight ends. And you do get Mahomes back. I like it a lot for Kelce. It's probably a week where you see his ownership spike a lot more. I mean, in the red zone this season, he's 4th in the entire league amongst both wide receivers and tight ends with 13 red zone targets. He has only 3 catches in the red zone, but he has 2 touchdowns called back. He had 1 drop touchdown, and then he had one where he would have walked in easily into the end zone, and he trips over his own feet and just falls and drops the ball. So there's a lot of unfortunate things that if 2 of those break his way, it looks like a normal season right now for Kelce, and he's continuing to smash. So inside the 10-yard line this season, nobody has more targets than Travis Kelce at his 9. He's tied with Kenny Golladay. So yeah, the price point coming down by that much, I have a lot of interest in Travis Kelce. Right now, looking at just the tight end board that I have on here, he is a top 2 option, and he'll probably end up being my he's right now 1A, 1B because of the price difference with Hooper, but he's up there as just a top option for me.
Tight end is pretty ugly this week. I can't say that I'm supremely confident in it. Going down just a little bit, we can work our way back up. But thoughts on Jack Doyle with T.Y. Hilton out? He saw 2 red zone targets last game. He played 77. And by the way, I'm not saying he gets more snaps because of Hilton. I'm talking about the voided targets here in this offense. Played 77% of snaps, and he's played 70+% of snaps in 5 straight weeks, 68% of snaps or more in every single week this season. Meanwhile, Eric Ebron's snap counts are significantly lower. Targets for Jack Doyle over the past 5 weeks, 8, 3, 5, 5, and 4. So really nothing spectacular, but found the end zone last week. It is the Miami Dolphins, and it is a team that is down their number 1 receiver at a weak tight end position on the week. What do you make of Jack Doyle here coming in at 3,600?
Yeah, I had some Doyle last week. I like the spot. I think a lot of him being propped up is definitely scheme, but there was somewhat of a rapport with Jacoby Brissett in the past when Andrew Luck was out. That might go out the window with Brissett not being there now. It's a spot where 3,600 is fine if you want to punt it. He's one of the better options down there. I think there's some other guys for cheaper that I might prefer. I think it's a weird price spot where, yeah, all year long he's been playing 75% of the snaps, and you still have Eric Ebron, who I get it, maybe more used in the red zone, so more upside, but price $300 more. It doesn't make much sense for the overall opportunity in snaps there and routes run. So Doyle at 3,600, he's like a 2 or 3 guys in that range of the 3K range where if you just decide to punt this week that I would get to, I'd probably put him as the number 1 on all of them. Maybe I'd put him at number 2, similarly priced some other players. This week, though, I doubt I get there much. Like, I think I'm going to have a tight player pool of 4 or 5 tight ends, and it's all going to be around that 5K and Travis Kelce range.
I mean, it's a brutal position. You've got Ingram, well, Kelce, Evan Ingram against the Jets, Hooper against New Orleans, Andrews against Cincy. Gerald Everett's 4,500. That's pretty absurd. So who are your top tight ends this week then?
Yeah, if I had to say it, it would be Kelce, Hooper, and Andrews right now are kind of separating themselves from the rest. The thing with Andrews last week, I saw he only played like 34% of the snaps, and you saw Nick Boyle play 80 plus. I don't know if he got hurt in that game. I don't know if it was just scheme-wise the Patriots were taking him out and they try to counter it a little bit, more of a chess type of matchup there with Belichick. But he only plays 34% of the snaps. He's not known for playing many snaps. He'll play like 50%, but that's a really big drop-off. Andrews, though, you get the Bengals. If you look at their points per game allowed to tight ends, very much skewed. They gave up like a floor game for 8.5 fantasy points to Kittle. You had Andrews himself having a really good game with 8 or 6 catches for 99 yards in a week where there was no Hollywood, so a little bit skewed. I like the matchup for him when the price point comes down. Overall in this spot for Andrews, a guy who continues to see ample targets. The difference there is it's going to be tiered here. It's going to be Travis Kelce and Hooper on like a tier of their own for their specific matchups. And I wouldn't be shocked if Kelce and Hooper took up probably somewhere around 60% of my ownership alone on tight ends. And then the rest fills in with Evan Ingram, Mark Andrews, and then even smaller on down the Greg Olsons, Jack Doyles of the world.
It's ugly though, dude. Like it's ugly. I don't have a lot of confidence whatsoever at the position. Rank them number 1, 2, 3, and 4 one more time before we get out.
Yeah, Travis Kelce, Austin Hooper, Mark Andrews, and then 4, I'll go Evan Ingram.
Okay, so you're really living in that 5K range.
Yeah, I really expect to just kind of, I guess, pay up. I mean, most of them are in 5K range, so not totally paying up, but at the position itself, I expect to just pay up. If I'm going to punt, it's probably for the most part going to go through a Greg Olsen. And I think we should at least mention $3,100 Ryan Griffin. He was surviving on just touchdowns the week before, but he saw 8 targets last week, and he had a touchdown actually that back of the end zone caught, one of those things where the ball falls out at the last second. They review it. It's ruled incomplete. So Ryan Griffin saw the volume last week, but that is very much dependent on if Chris Herndon remains out. But he's probably my number 1 punt option. Mike Gesicki had a really good week, probably the best game of his career last year. I don't know if we chalk that up to a fluke, but the Colts do want tight ends to catch the ball. So $3,100 Mike Gesicki, also in that punt range of $3,000 tight ends. He's probably like the 4th guy I get to there.
That's actually who I was going to bring up. I actually think that he's viable there.
Yeah.
And losing Preston Williams only makes it a little bit more appealing.
Yeah, and Mark Walton.
And yeah, Mark Walton with the suspension. Yeah, nothing he's done recently, by the way. I mean, Jonnu Smith, he's run 46 routes over the last 2 weeks combined. That's 19th at the position. Evan Ingram, 71. Wow. Most in the league. Did you see this, though? Vance McDonald's run 68 routes, which is 3rd in the league over the last 2 weeks. Ryan Griffin's run 67, which is 4th. That's pretty wild for both of them.
Yeah, and like Griffin, I saw the routes come up 2 weeks ago, and I just thought it was a factor. And he's playing a ton of snaps, like all the snaps. I just thought it was just the game flow of that one. He didn't have a lot of targets, but last week he saw 8 targets, and like I said, the touchdown called back. So they're really heavily using Ryan Griffin right now. And if Chris Herndon doesn't come back, like that's a $3,100 tight end that the production the last few weeks, and I think it's somewhat stable in the offense, says that he should be priced somewhere around 4K, 4,500.
Yeah, I do think Herndon comes back. He was active. I would expect him to return, but if he doesn't, I hear you. Before we get out of here, let's just one more second on Mike Gesicki. He is cheap, and it feels like it hurts, it pains me to say this, but it feels like that game is coming where he finally shows us why he was drafted early as a top tight end in the draft. I don't need him to be great, but at this price where he's, cheaper than Jonnu Smith, he's cheaper than Cameron Brate by quite a bit. He's cheaper than Chris Herndon and Ebron and Hawkinson and he's $1,400 cheaper than Gerald Everett. I think, to put it simply, if I'm going to punt the position, I'll probably get to Mike Gesicki, maybe Jack Doyle, but I think Mike Gesicki makes sense because if there was an opportunity for, him to get 9 targets out of nowhere, given the state of affairs with Miami's offensive skill players, this could be the week.
Yeah, exactly. And like the last game that he played was definitely the best game of his career. And he's had the best past month of his career, not saying much. Like outside of that game, he's had like 40 yard total games with like a couple of catches, but he has not done anything in his career outside of that. Been a real disappointment, but we'll see now. I think it's important. Yeah. Point out Mark Walton out like we did. And then also you pointing out Preston Williams. There has to be other people to step up. I do think like an Albert Wilson takes a little bit more priority there, but there's just going to be more work to go around. And then, yeah, OJ Howard's the only other thing. He's coming back, but no real interest. Even though it's a good matchup against Arizona, he's expected to be back.
All right. Anything else before we close this one out? First look, Tuesday, 5th of November. Good show as always, Sal.
Yeah, you as well. I think just quick, since we brought up Mark Walton at the running back spot, just wait on that. I think they're going to activate probably Myles Gaskin. I don't expect Ballage to be the 70% of the workload guy. They've been very reluctant to do that all season.
Even if he is, dude is trash. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Terrible. And he's running in that offense. But if Myles Gaskin at $3,000 is active on Sunday, you could probably expect him to see like 50+% of the snaps are around there. And that's interesting at minimum price running back.
All right. Well, that'll do it. Tell them where they can find you before we get out of here.
Yeah, definitely. You can find me on Twitter at Sal Vetri DFS, and then just my YouTube channel as well. I do some fantasy content. It's just Sal Vetri over there as well.
All right. We'll see you back here tomorrow on the NFL Strategy Show. It'll be Chris Spags, and it'll be myself. We've got plenty more coming up throughout the day. The NBA Strategy Show already happened. That was with Adam and with Josh. Was right before us, as a matter of fact. I'm trying to see if let's see here. There you have it. Yeah, Josh. It was Josh and Adam. You got the NHL Strategy Show with Jake coming up. He'll be with Nolan. The Deeper Dive and the Live Before Lock, Adam and myself, then Eddie and Chris Randone. And then the NBA Early Bird taking a first look at tomorrow's slate. That'll be out around 10 p.m. Check for it on the site. It's not live. We will upload it with Dan Strafford and Josh Engelman. So a lot to be had. YouTube.com/awesome. Before you head out, if you like the show, you want to help support us so we can continue to put out free content here, give us a thumbs up. Like the video. We appreciate it greatly. And good things will happen to you as a result. Subscribe, hit that notification bell as well. We'll see you back here tomorrow on the NFL Strategy Show presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports.